Designing Your Work-Life Balance. I'm Tom Tivnan, Managing Editor of the Bookseller. One of the byproducts of this difficult time we're living in, maybe the only positive one, is it has people thinking deeply and reassessing how and where they work and how that work fits into their lives. And almost as if it were planned, a useful book around these very topics out next week, Designing Your Work Life by Phil Burnett and Dave Evans. There she is, right there. Talk about the issues and the book around how you can design your life is one of the book's authors, Bill Burnett. Bill and his co-author Dave are both Stanford University professors and co-founders of Stanford's Life Design Lab. They previously co-wrote the bestseller, Designing Your Life. Bill is something of a Stanford lifer, I think we could say. He was a student at Stanford studying product design and has been associated with the university for coming on to 40 years, I think. A lot of his work outside of academia has been in leading and working on design teams for a wide variety of products, many of which we are all familiar with, from Apple's PowerBooks to Hasbro's original Star Wars action figures. A few of the latter I own, even though I'm a grown man. But there you go. Welcome, Bill. Thanks for joining us for what is probably a very ungodly early hour on the West Coast of America.
Well, it's not too bad. Yeah, good morning or good afternoon, Tom. It's great to be here.
Great.
You know, I always ask people, do you think it was cooler to do Star Wars than Apple? Because Apple was a really big part of my career. Yeah. And my very, very first job, I was working on Star Wars toys. And everybody says Star Wars.
I agree. But before we get deeper into the conversation, just a little housekeeping for everybody who's tuning in. Bill and I will be talking for almost an hour, but feel free to throw some questions at us during the course, and we'll either dip into them during the course of our chat or at the end, depending on how it fits. But if you could you tag all panelists and attendees and just put your question in caps so we can differentiate them from just comments. And also, we're going to post this video online just after we finish, so tell your family, friends, and I guess colleagues that we'll be doing so if you find it interesting. We'll post it on a YouTube channel, but we'll tweet the link out on the Bookseller social media as soon as we're able. Mm-hmm. Great, well, let's crack on. Before we kind of get deeper into the sort of issues themselves, Bill, can you just kind of take a step back and go into why you and Dave decided to write this particular book? Because obviously you had Designing Your Life, and a lot of that had a bit of careers stuff in it, because career jobs
we talked about how you find jobs and stuff in that book.
Yeah, just why specifically did you want to focus on work for this one?
Sure. You know, one thing we both teach at Stanford, by the way. I'm an adjunct lecturer. That's a big distinction, because I don't want the real professors to get mad.
Yeah.
Adjunct professor, and we're research based. We look at the research around all these subjects before we start writing. And the first book was pretty successful, and we were talking with our editors, and they said, you know, let's do another book. And we said, well, we didn't get a chance to go as deep as we wanted to into how to make work more energizing, more engaged, more fun. When you look at the research, Gallup does a worldwide poll of how engaged people are in their work. And in the US, 68% of workers are disengaged or actively disengaged at their job. Worldwide, it's like 85%. The UK numbers are right in the middle. So that, you know, if 60 or 70% of the people are getting up on Monday morning going, nah, I got to go to work today. Yeah. And they're not happy, something's going on. We should be able to redesign that. And then two other statistics I thought were really fun when we started digging into the book. One was at any given time, 40% of your workers are looking for a job while they're on the job. So almost half your workforce is like Googling, how do I get out of here? And the one that's really cool, and I think this is just a US statistic, 25% of workers surveyed said they would give up their next raise if you would fire their boss. They literally said, I will pay you to fire my boss. And so, you know, and some of those, by the way, some of the people who answered that were bosses who want to pay you to fire their boss. I mean, this isn't just people at the bottom. So across the board, there was a lot of discontent. not a lot of engagement. And it seemed like, gosh, I've always enjoyed my jobs. I've always been really creatively engaged in my jobs. We should be able to dig into this and find some tools and some design techniques to help people redesign their job. And, the first book was really about kind of how, the way we look at it is there's your life with a job in it, right? So you got the big thing is life. Jobs are what we spend most of our time doing, but not everybody spends all of their time in jobs. And jobs are more than just what you get paid for, obviously. There's a lot of other things that happen in the world that you do for work that are not necessarily compensated. So we really wanted to dig into that and help people just find more joy, more engagement, more of developing their own self. And it looked like it was a big problem. And the more we got into it and the more research we did and the more we talked to people, the more we realized that people really were stuck. And nowadays, it's not just it's not just I've got the regular job, 9 to 5, I go to work. There's also gig workers, people who are maybe doing a gig on the side, a little side job, or they're doing something that is their full-time job, but it's they're really an independent consultant or an independent operator. And that's brand new, really, in terms of it being something like 30% of the workforce is doing some kind of a gig. So the workforce is changing, AI is coming, the robots and automation are coming. It just seemed like this was a really good time to sort of dive in and say, well, how can we apply design tools to making this a more satisfying experience?
Can you sort of unpack that? Because the overarching theme of the book is applying those design principles to the work. Can you kind of unpack some of those design principles for us and how to go about different ways of thinking about it?
Yeah, my real job at Stanford is I'm the executive director of the design program, the same program I graduated from. I have the real wonderful privilege of running now with for David Kelly, who's our senior academic guy. David is the guy who started the D School and started the big international design firm IDEO. He's our famous guy. But I teach design to young undergraduate and graduate students who want to become designers and then go work at places like I worked at Apple or Google or Facebook or start their own companies, whatever. So I'm teaching people how to design products, services, experiences using this methodology we call design thinking. And, in 2006, 2007, I was talking to Dave Evans, who I'd known previously, but we hadn't ever collaborated before. He was talking about a career class he was doing over at Berkeley. And I said, we should be able to apply design thinking to careers. That was our first point. It's like, how can we, because I've always sort of designed my career and I kind of unconsciously used design tools to do that. And so that we started looking at how does design thinking work for products and services to make something new to the world. Before there was ever a mouse, somebody had to invent it and nobody knew what a mouse was. And the way we teach design is it's this iterative process where you do a deep dive of empathy with your users, try to understand the users. Then you come up with lots of ideas about how to solve their problems, and you keep reframing the problem until you have a rich set of solutions. And then you build lots and lots of prototypes. We say in design thinking, you build your way forward. You build to think. So that's exactly what all those things apply to your life. You're trying to build the next version of you. You don't know what it's going to look like. Hopefully it's going to be cooler than the current version, or the next job or the next thing will be even more interesting. Though design's a pretty neutral point of view, other than every time you design something, you try to make it better, right? You don't want the next design to be worse. You want it to be better. So if you start with empathy for yourself, what am I good at? What do I like to do? And then empathy for the world. What does the world need? What does the world need that I can supply? If I can make that connection, we're already starting in a good place. And then mostly we try to teach people how to think like designers. Designers start with curiosity. They're curious about how things work. They're curious about something new, and radical collaboration. Designers always work on teams with lots of different people to get the most ideas. So radically collaborating in the world with your colleagues, with other people in the workplace. And not just the folks in your group, but everywhere in the organization gives you a broader view of what are the possibilities. And then reframing ideas. One of our big things is reframing. Like if you describe the problem too small, there's no solutions in it. You got to back up a step and think more broadly. It's like, what was it? There's a famous case study about, the train system in America went out of business when the, long haul trucking world was invented because the train guys thought they were in the train business. They didn't step back and say, no, we're in the transportation business. We're in the moving things around business. They could have invented long haul trucking, but they were all, they were too tunnel visioned on the wrong problem. So reframing, radical collaboration, start with curiosity, and then a bias to action. Build lots of stuff, build lots of prototypes to move forward. So all of those ideas are embedded in this book, where we talk about, if you're looking, if you've got a job but you're not satisfied, don't resign. That's crazy. That's taking a huge risk. You can redesign right in place, and oftentimes redesign without even anyone else's permission, to change, how you experience the job, how much job satisfaction you get. And we use lots of the mindsets and those tools to try to help people, make something work. And paradoxically, the big theme in the book is set the bar low.
Yeah.
And we said that, in some ways to make it funny, but also to really emphasize, if you look at the science, the psychology behind behavior change, and this has been studied very deeply now, and it's used in a lot of applications. When you're trying to change a habit, either get rid of a bad habit or change a habit that you've got to be more positive, or just install a new habit or a new behavior, most people fail. It's hard to change. And the reason they fail is that they try something way too big. Like, it's I'm going to make my New Year's resolution, and this year I'm going to, Tom says I'm going to run a marathon. And I say, well, Tom, can I see your phone for a second? You're not even doing 5,000 steps a day, dude. A marathon is like 100 million steps. So
how did you know this? This is this January.
For all I know, Tom's a ultra marathoner. He's 100-mile races. I don't know. And so the problem is, if you say, I want to run a marathon, but you're only doing 5,000 steps, nothing you can do in the next 2 weeks is going to look anything like a marathon. And so you just give up. But if we said, hey, we're doing 5,000, that's awesome. Let's go for 10,000. When we hit 10,000 3 weeks in a row, as an average, then we're gonna step it up to to 15 or 20. Pretty soon, I'm running a 5K. Pretty soon, I'm running a 10K. And now we're starting to get into the possibility of looking at what would it take to train for a marathon. So all of our stuff is very accessible, because the first step is really simple. The first step might be as easy as pick up the phone and call a friend and ask this question. Can you do that? Sure, you can do that. It's a friend. They're gonna take your call. And then each of the steps past that gets a little harder, a little more aggressive. But you build this, what David Kelly called in his book, creative confidence. You build the confidence that your curiosity and your good questions are going to lead you to a good answer. And it just takes a little bit of practice. But we really do think if you set the bar low and then beat it, and do that over and over again, you have the highest chance of really, getting something out of your career that is more satisfying than you're at. And for people who are really happy with their careers, awesome. Do you want to make them a little better? Do you want to add something to your day job that isn't there? We have one tool, because people are always worried about the dilemma of making money versus having a meaningful job. So money versus meaning, it's one of these false dichotomies where, there's a tension between two things, and if one goes up, the other goes down. And that's just a terrible way to, put yourself in a box. And so we've reframed that. And the reframe is that you're actually paid in 3 completely different currencies in this world. In the market economy, you're paid in money, but that's not the only way you get paid. If you're running a, nonprofit or an after-school program for kids to keep kids, out of gangs and teach them how to read, then you get paid an impact. The impact, how many kids are out there that are, that are being in my program and learning to read, and they're going to go on to school and they're going to be successful. And I got them out of a cycle of poverty. And then if you're in the creative economy, if you're a writer, an artist, a poet, a playwright, you get paid sort of in expression dollars. You get paid to express your creativity. You paid for your creativity by being allowed to do your play, publish your poem. So if you step back and you go, well, I'm happy with my job, but yeah, I could use a little more impact. That'd be good if I had more impact in the world. I don't want, when I die, I don't want people to be standing around going, well, Bill did good PowerPoints and got his budgets in on time. I'd like a little more impact than that, right? Or every time we do Odyssey plans with people, which is the big assignment in the first book, 3 completely different versions of your life. Almost 100% of the time, somebody says, they'll say, I wish I was a little more creative. I wish I had more creativity in my life. I wish I did have some more creative expression. And you don't have to get all of it from your job. That's one of the cool parts about everybody having, the new gig economy is everybody can have a side gig. Mm. You can be the accountant by day, and your side gig can be, spoken word poetry, and you go to open mic nights. Well, I don't know if they have those right now, but you can get your poetry out in the world, and you can do poetry competitions, and it doesn't all have to come from one source, because I think now people are realizing, I'm really going to have a portfolio of kind of careers. Some things I get paid for, some things I do for the love of doing it. I don't know your history. I'm a, I guess second generation. My grandparents grew up in Germany. Hmm. And in 1932, my grandfather said, I don't think this Hitler guy's going to turn out so good. Just been elected chancellor. And so he got the family the heck out of Germany. Classic immigrant story, had no money, came to New York, made enough money to go back and get his wife and kids and bring them back. But he took any job he could take. Literally, he worked at the sewage plant for 50 cents a day, literally shoveling sewage. So that was, the mission there was put food on the table, put a roof over our heads and put us someplace safe in America. Actually ended up in California. But his satisfaction came from the community he had around him. Quite a few German immigrants in that part of California, and and the people that he knew, they all get together at his house. He played the zither, which is a beautiful sort of harp-like, flat instrument, European instrument. And then people would come over, and he was active in the church, and he had another community where he had impact and meaning, and the job was meaningful. But he didn't grow up wanting to work in a sewage plant. He just wanted safety and security. So I think you don't have it's a modern idea that you're going to get all your needs met, love, passion, engagement, satisfaction from one thing, your job. And so we really want to encourage people to look at what brings them impact, what brings impact into their life, what brings expression into their life, and what brings money into their life. And when you reframe it that way, it becomes quite an interesting game to sort of balance all those things and think about how you could optimize, even if you are happy, how you could optimize, your engagement right now.
Yeah. One of the things I was wondering about, can you go through this reframing when you're, say, a first jobber coming into what is or an early career person coming into what is quite obviously a very, very difficult time right now to get employment, first of all. And how do you go about doing that when you're early on?
Well, yeah, and first of all, for those of you just coming out of university or just graduating this year, you have my tremendous respect for completing that accomplishment. That's incredible. I advise about 120 my students at Stanford, and we got them through. We got them through graduation. It sure wasn't what they were expecting or what we were expecting. Kind of doing it all virtually. But I think now, actually, in this sort of COVID pandemic times, you have to reframe. I mean, because you can't. The old normal is gone, and the new normal isn't established yet. So we're all in this transition zone, waiting to figure out what the heck's going to happen. So this is a perfect time to learn how to be resilient. And if you're good at reframing, you're inherently resilient, because you can take any situation and say, all right, well, where's the opportunity in this situation? If you're clinging to waiting for it to get better, and we don't know when better's going to come, it's not going to come quickly. you're really stuck. So I think reframing around where the opportunities really are is critical right now. You know, I was sitting with a bunch of my students in December, just last, the end of last year. And I was saying, guys, the men and women in this group, I said, I've never seen a better job market in Silicon Valley. You are graduating into the best job market on the planet. You will have your pick of interesting things to do. It's going to be so exciting. And 4 months later, in March, April, I'm sitting there going, okay, how do we help these students, through this situation? And what we've discovered, and we did a lot of work on this, is that there are jobs out there. It's just lumpy. It's really lumpy. I can only use my experience around the tech industry, but obviously, if you're Airbnb or Lyft or Uber or anything to do with hospitality, transportation, airlines, that kind of stuff, those industries are really crippled right now. But I've had I have a bunch of my students have gotten jobs in the AR/VR lab at Facebook or other companies like that. Some companies are really booming and benefiting. Look at Zoom. Who even knew what Zoom was, last year? And now it has become the ubiquitous, mechanism for having these kinds of conversations. So you have to reframe now around, okay, maybe I wanted to work in healthcare or transportation, or, I wanted to work for something like an Airbnb, or that was where I was interested. And you're just gonna have to say, look, those things are gone. There's no point in fishing where there are no fish, right? And that pond is empty. Now, but if I reframe and say, well, yeah, but what's my first job really about? It's about, one, learning how to be a professional and show up on time, get my work done. It's learning the basic business skills I'll need to be successful for the rest of my career. And it's all about practicing, starting to practice whatever I studied in school. If I studied engineering, or studied communications, or I studied economics or history or philosophy, whatever it is, my first job is about learning to apply my skills and knowledge in a way that is productive. So that's not linked to any particular industry. That's not linked to any particular target. Those skills can be worked on in almost any opportunity. And so you have to go fishing where the fish are. And some places are actually booming now, and they have a shortage of employees. And you just have to learn how to position yourself. Maybe one of the other mindsets or styles of a designer is storytelling. It doesn't do any good to invent something new. You got to invent something new and then explain, why is this thing the thing that if you had this in your future, your life would be amazing. So storytelling is a critical skill we teach all our designers, and storytelling is how you get your next job or your first job, because it's not about searching on the internet. None of those things work. It's going to come through a series of personal connections or a network that you energize by getting curious, finding where the opportunities are by talking to people, running some quick prototypes on how can I tell my story, how can I approach these folks, and then telling your story. And that's actually the designing your work life and designing your life in a nutshell. Get curious, talk to people, try stuff, tell your story. So get curious, talk to people, try stuff, prototype your way forward, tell your story. A curious person is an attractive person. People who have that curious energy are just kind of fun to talk to. And they tell good stories. And the stories lead to opportunities. And that's how you'll find your first job.
One of the interesting things, kind of, I guess, of reframing is you talk about redesigning your own job with or without your boss. I think people get stuck on that, because I do think they kind of stay in their lanes and often don't have take on a lot of agency for themselves sometimes, just because they're within the role that's set out for them. So how do people go about doing that? What are your tips and tricks to how to redesign it without your boss, or how to reframe it, I guess?
Well, it's a couple of ideas. One is, again, we like to pull from research and apply it. And a lot of the stuff comes from positive psychology, the work of Martin Seligman or Dan Gilbert, who wrote Emotional Intelligence, or Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's got the theory of flow. But there's another group of psychologists, a guy named Edward Dietschy, who are looking at sort of intrinsic motivations. Humans are weird, and that we'll do stuff just because it's interesting to do it. We don't always just work on a stimulus reward. I do this, I get a reward. I get food, I get money, I get something. And in fact, the things that they identified as intrinsic motivations, the desire for autonomy, to do things, sort of my way, the desire to work together with other people, so that's relatedness, and the desire to get better at what I do, just because I want to get better at it for my own satisfaction and competency. So autonomy, relatedness, and competency, we call the arc of your career. And what the classic experiment is they bring two groups in and they say, we're going to time you, and we've given you this puzzle to do. Either it's a word puzzle or it's an actual, like a jigsaw puzzle. And we're going to time you and measure your performance. And one group, they just say, solve the puzzle and go for it. And the other group, they say, we'll pay you $10 if you solve the puzzle. And inevitably, regardless of the puzzle or the setup, the people who are rewarded with an extrinsic reward, $10, do poorly. They do less well than the people who do it just for the joy of doing it. Because there's some things like if you pay me to do stuff, I just don't do it as well as I did because when I'm doing it for my own internal reward system, I work harder. So if you think about it, well, not everybody has autonomy on their job. Many people have, they have a structured, like you say, a structured role, and they do what they're told to do. But how you do it, or what order you do it in, or what choices you make about, doing it, is how you exercise your autonomy. And you don't really need to ask anybody else to do that. Relatedness, this idea of that we love working with people. I mean, everybody's working with somebody. And even if the group you're in isn't particularly, satisfying in terms of the social relationships, you're working in a larger organization, you can always find people, that you can connect with. And nobody's stopping you from getting better at your job, from increasing your competence. So if you lean into your own intrinsic motivations, you can up your engagement and up your satisfaction just by paying attention to those three things: autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And then there's lots of ways to redesign a job, in place. In the book, we talk about 4 different ways to do it, but it's, and we can get into that if you want, but most of the time, what we've found is that the walls around you that you think prevent you from doing what you want to do, some of those are very real. Certainly if you work in a highly regulated industry, you can't just, do things that would be, if you're an airplane pilot, you can't just decide, hey, let's fly the plane upside down today and see how people feel. I mean, that's not going to be okay. But most of the things that prevent us from finding some satisfaction in what we do are rules or walls we invented. And we invent them because we want to be a good employee and we don't want to break the rules. We don't want to upset the boss and everything else. But mostly they're keeping us in a cage, and they're keeping us there because it feels safer there. And it's a little risky to step outside of that. So a lot of what, when people talk to me about their situation and we start brainstorming solutions, and they're like, wow, I do have lots of things I could try, don't I? And I go, yeah, you do, but you're kind of afraid to even go there, right? To think about what can I do to make it better. And now the next step is, and we were talking about this a little bit before we went on the air. It's like, and the next step is set the bar really low. Let's try something really simple. Like, I want to up my relatedness at work. I'm going to have coffee with that guy in accounting. We've chatted a couple of times, about soccer or rugby or something. And I'm just going to see if he wants to have a cup of coffee. That will up my connection, relatedness, Eventually, I might start, everybody gets to work, half an hour early, and we all talk about how to make our jobs better. But I'm going to try something really easy first. And people have more moves than they think.
Yeah. One of the things you also go in is this feeling of being overwhelmed at work, which I think probably is a lot of people, and we seem to be time pressured and in stressful jobs. How do people get around that? How do they reframe things so we can better deal with that?
You know, we like to, one of the things is when you're overwhelmed, it's really hard to, hard to see, the forest for the trees, right?
Yeah.
And we like to give people at least a simple framework that can sort stuff out. So, and it's fun if it's easy to remember. So we say there's three kinds of overwhelmed. There's Hydra, happy, and hyper. Hydra, happy, hyper. There's also another kind of overwhelmed, which is you're just burned out.
Yeah, well,
That's actually serious. I mean, and in the book, we put in the Mayo Clinic's test for burnout. And if you don't need the book, just go to the Mayo Clinic website. It's up there. And if you have more than 3 or 4 of these, 12 characteristics, you may be, psychologically heading for a burnout. And that's emotional and mental collapse. That's a serious problem. So, if for whatever reason you've worked yourself into that state, I'm not a doctor, immediately go find someone who can help you, because once you cross over into burnout and you've had a mental or physical collapse, you have a real medical problem. That's dangerous.
Yeah.
But most people, I think, are just there's just too much on their plate, and it comes in 3 varieties. The Hydra thing, the 9-headed monster, is like, well, I'm doing my job, and then George quit, and they give me all of George's responsibilities, and then we, have this new division, and all of a sudden I've got another boss over there who wants stuff from me, and pretty soon my job, I've got 3 bosses and 25 things to do, and I just can't get it all done. And it kind of creeps up on you, and eventually you realize there's just too much to do. I mean, there really are 9 heads to this monster, and I cannot manage it. The approach there is to first realize that, then document, what are the inputs that are coming in, and what are the outputs going out of my role, and just write it all down, and put it into buckets that make sense. And then you sit down with your manager and you say, look, I really want to do a great job. I want empathy for the person you're designing for. I'm redesigning my job so my manager looks great, right? That's the point of view. I mean, yeah, I'm going to benefit from it, but I can't go in there and say, hey, look, I got too much to do and I don't want to do it. I'm willing to do half of it. Is that okay? That's not going to work. So you say, I'm pretty sure you want me to be efficient. I've rank ordered what I think your priorities are for this job. Here's the 5 things I really have to do well. There's about 25 other things that are going on here. Is it possible for us to realign this, maybe move some of this stuff out to someone else? Remember, I took on all of George's stuff. I was supposed to be temporary, but now it seems like I'm doing all of George's work, and he's not here anymore. So, if you can put in a set of priorities that your manager or the organization understands. 1, you look like a person who's a real team player. 2, you look like a person who's trying to do a better job, not just get rid of stuff to make it easier. And that often works. It takes a little bit of time and a little bit of negotiation. And we propose, you should say, let me propose a prototype. For 2 weeks, I'm going to give you these things, but these other things someone else is going to do. Let's see how that works. And I'm flexible. If it doesn't work, we'll come up with another prototype. So that's the Hydra. The happy overwhelm is, and I'm classically involved in this. It's like, I've got my day job as the executive director of the program, and I have to do some fundraising and some other stuff. And then I like to teach classes. So I teach, like most professors teach 1 class a quarter. I teach 3, and let's do this side project called Designing Your Life. And then, let's launch an innovation center in Thailand. That sounds like fun. And before you know it, I got 9 projects going, and they're all great. I'm happy. I would be happy to do any of them. I just have too many. And in that case, it's relatively easy to just, say, okay, what are the projects that bring me the most joy, or the ones that are the most interesting, and give the other interesting projects away to someone else, because they're good projects. They're not crummy work. I just took on too many of them. So if you're the kind of person who's got too many good things on your plate, that's actually easier than just too much stuff, because the things are interesting and someone else will be happy to pick them up. And then the hyper overwhelm is just, that's the startup. I've done 3 startups. And the description of startup is like flying an airplane while you're trying to build the airplane, right? There's not enough people. There's too much to do. There's no systems in place. How do we buy something? We need a purchase order. We don't have a purchase order yet. Well, go invent it, while you're buying it, invent the system that allows you to buy it. Or how do we hire people? Well, we just hire them. Well, who's doing payroll? We don't have a payroll.
Yeah.
So in that case, if you decide to opt into a hyper lifestyle, like in a startup or in a turnaround situation or something like that, then really the solution is it's a sort of a reframe and re-enlist. Okay, I've decided to do this, therefore my life will be very busy. But since I chose to be very busy, what I need to now do is organize my life in a way where this is still possible. The story of a guy in the book who had a startup, who was going to do a startup, and he called up all his friends and he said, I'm doing a startup, and for 3 years, I'm just going to be a crummy friend. You're probably only going to see me on like Thanksgiving and Christmas because I'm going to be too busy. He sat his family down and said, you're my first priority. I will make sure I spend time with you, but I'm not spending time with anyone else in the family, just you guys. And I'm all in on this startup, and it's probably going to take me 3 years before we find out if it's going to work. Is that okay? Can I negotiate? I'll still be a good dad, and I'll still take care of, those responsibilities. But, I'm not going to be available for anything else. And I think this is the Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning thing. Like, if I have a good why I'm doing something, I can deal with almost any how, right? If I make the decision to go all in on a startup or a new venture, or I'm opening a store, or I'm starting my gig and I really want to launch this. Well, if I've got a good why, I can deal with the overwhelm for a period of time.
Yeah. One of the things he also discusses office politics. I guess this can be both, personal and kind of institutional in big corporations, that you have these ways of working. How can you, as an employee, again, I'll use the terminology, reframe that and kind of navigate your way through that?
Yeah. And, everybody talks about, the politics of the office and it's all rotten. And, I've advised three-person startup that had more politics in it than I had at Apple. And so the first reframe is that, politics are just when people get together and they start working and they form an organization, and some people have authority and some people have, more authority than others, and some people have influence on that authority. It's just a system that makes decisions work. Now, assuming that everyone is trying to make the firm's objectives work better, or make the firm successful, or move the nonprofit forward and have more impact, whatever the agenda is, assuming everybody's on that agenda, then learning how to understand office politics, it gives you kind of what we call X-ray vision. You start to see, this is how decisions get made around here. There's the way we say that decisions get made, and then there's the real way they get made. And decisions get, someone with in order for a decision to happen, someone who has the authority to make the decision needs to say yes or no. But that's not the whole story, because that person who has the authority to make the decision is gathering information from all over the organization. What's the best decision to make if they're trying to do a good job? So there are people who have influence on that authority. They may not themselves be able to make decisions, but they have influence. In a simple case, I'm the executive director. I actually hired Dave to work for me to teach classes. So in my role there, I have the authority to make decisions about how the program runs and how money is spent. But Dave has the influence, is highly influential, because I need his input in order to make a good decision. So once you understand that in our organization, I can make decisions. There's people who work for me who can make decisions. They have to check in with me. They have influencers on them. It'd be really helpful if we had a picture here. I've got, we've got a picture in the book, and it's kind of like, it's not an org chart. Like, here's a box. These two people report to this person. These two people report to that person. It's not that. Authority is like a vertical axis. It goes up and up and up and up. And then around that axis, there's this sort of spinning thing of, influence and people. And the farther up you go, the narrower the cone is, and the faster things are spinning. So if you want to have influence or authority, you've got to constantly be building, your value in the organization. And once you, and we, there's people who have influence, there's people who don't, there's people who have authority, there's people who don't. You can map the whole thing. And once you do that, you can start to see, oh, I see how decisions are getting made here. I see why we did what we did. And I see how to up even if I don't necessarily have the authority to make a decision, I can certainly influence the decision makers if I bring them information that's valuable, that's aligned with the organization's needs, and if I make sure that that value is recognized. I mean, it's no good doing good work in the corner and nobody notices, right? So, the only part of the game you got to play is, work to make your work both valuable to the organization and visible, so that people will say, oh, that was Tom's idea. And he convinced Bill that would be a good idea, and Bill had the authority to make the decision happen, and then it happened. Now, the only time politics go bad are when organizations are in chaos. And my guess is right now there's a lot of organizations in chaos. When I was at Apple, it was after Steve had left. John Scully was just stepping down. We had 3 CEOs before Steve came back to Apple, right? In like 98, 99. And I left just before he came back. Well, you have 3 CEOs, you get 3 different management teams, you get 3 different objectives. Nobody knows, what are we doing this week? Are we still doing plan A? Are we on some new plan B? And when that happens, and there's really no clarity around what the direction is, then you can get bad politics. And the bad politics are, well, nobody's paying any attention to what I'm doing, so I'm just going to become my own little empire, and I'm going to make decisions that make it better for me or me and my friends, but I don't care what happens to Apple anymore because there's nobody minding the store. So there were pockets of really bad politics in that sort of situation. And so, if an organization's in chaos, or if there's a bad actor who's just acting in their own interest and not in the interest of the organizations, it's good to identify that, because that's not something you can fix. You just need to get away from that kind of politics. But all the rest of it is really easy to understand, and it's really transparent. There's an old joke. The politics at the universities are so intense because the stakes are so low. Right? There's nothing to win at the university. You either have tenure or you don't. That's based on merit. And then after that, it's just like, who gets to tell the secretaries what to do? I mean, there's really it's a completely flat thing. But in most organizations where there is a hierarchy, you can really understand who has authority, who has influence, and how does that act on decision-making. And that will describe the whole world of politics. And you'll have X-ray vision. You'll be able to predict before a meeting happens what the outcome of that meeting will be.
Yeah. I guess we've been talking, and maybe this is my bias from reading the book, but I've been kind of looking at it from an employee looking up to managerial. But can managers kind of take this kind of way of looking at their organization and doing a top-down sort of thing? They be reframing.
I mean, actually, we've got a lot of sidebars in the book about how managers can apply this. Like, just if you understand that people have 3 intrinsic motivations: autonomy, relatedness, and competency, and you understand that paying bonuses is not going to make any of those better, you already have a tool where by allowing the employee to increase their autonomy, like, I'm going to tell you what needs to get done, but I'm not going to tell you how to do it. Give me 3 ways you want to get this thing done, and we'll talk about it. Just changing that framework. All of a sudden, you're the boss who's engaging me in a new way. I'm feeling listened to. I'm feeling more, more autonomy, more connectedness. You're challenging me to up my competency, and I kind of want to get better at this anyway. That's an intrinsic motivation. That's a super easy way for management to employ these ideas. The whole, the 4 ways of redesigning your job: reframing, remodeling, relocating, or reinventing. I can facilitate that for employees. You don't seem to be that happy in what you're doing. I know I can get more productivity out of you. Let's look at remodeling your job to figure out how I can get the best out of your signature strengths. We'll have somebody else do the other stuff. I mean, if you promote an environment where employees feel the autonomy, relatedness, and competency, if you promote an environment that allows people to, because people change, like you get really good at one job, you do it for a while, and then you're like, well, I'm not that excited about the same way. I had done 11 laptop computers at Apple. And I looked around, there wasn't really anywhere to go up or sideways. And it was like, well, I don't really want to do 12. The 12, that's just 12 is too many. So if there's nothing else to do, I'm leaving. It wasn't that I was unhappy. I thought Apple was an amazing company. It was fantastic. I just was bored with doing that. I wanted to try something else. And, as much fun as it is to design Apple products, I couldn't design a refrigerator. I couldn't design a toilet. I couldn't design a TV, at least in those days at Apple. And when I left, I did a consulting firm and I designed toilets, refrigerators, TVs, medical devices, all sorts of things. So, a manager, my model of management is what people would call service leadership. A manager's job is to get the crap out of the way so their people can do a good job. And be that umbrella, so all the stuff that's coming down from above them that makes no sense. And just, providing people, a positive work environment. So you can apply all of these ideas as a manager. And I think it's actually the half of the book is really focused on how can you manage people better using the science of behavior change and intrinsic motivations and the positive psychology. We have a good time journal in the first book, and we have a good a good job journal in this book. And if you just got all of your employees journaling about how they're going on the job, and then sharing that information, you could optimize everybody's job. The notion, the other thing that's so funny is the notion that jobs are fixed. They're not fixed. Things are changing every month. Nowadays, particularly, things are changing almost weekly. Yeah. So, the fact that I was good at doing something, 6 months ago, and you want me to just keep doing the same thing isn't that productive. In fact, as automation, as new tools come in place, there's dozens and dozens of ways to look at every role and figure out how to optimize it, or recraft it or reshape it around the new requirements, the new needs. And so I manage a few people at Stanford in the labs and stuff, but when I was managing, 30 or 40 people or teams at Apple, I really enjoyed it because I really enjoyed watching people grow into the best engineer they could be, or grow into, particularly when you promote someone to a young engineer, you promote them to manager, and then for the first 6 months they turn into an idiot and they start being mean to the admins and they start ordering people around, and then you have to pull them aside and say, "What the heck are you doing? You've turned into the boss you wouldn't work for." Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah, okay, let's go back to service leadership and how we do this. But I just love watching people grow into good managers and grow into the best versions of themselves. So I think I think a lot of the tools in the book are really about how do you manage a great organization, not just how do you manage yourself.
Yeah. Obviously, a lot of the book is about redesigning your job, but we move jobs a lot of times, and there's often times when you say, "Oh, I've just got to get out." How do you manage that you sort of exit? And is there an ideal way to reframe your exit from?
Yeah, we did a chapter on quitting well, how to quit well. There are going to be times when it's either time to move on or the organization, has done a strategic shift and you just don't want to, be there anymore or whatever. So he said there's 4 steps, leave the campsite better than you found it. Rev up your internal network because you got this big network, and don't just leave, make sure you've connected to your network where you are. Set your replacement up to win and then exit well. So leave the campsite better than you found it is get all the crap that, is supposed to get done, and get it all organized and get it and clean it up. Don't leave projects unfinished or pending things that aren't well documented, because that's just the professional thing to do, and people will admire that you were, rigorous in getting your house in order before you left. Your network of people who like you, respect you, whatever, at your office make sure you reach out to those people, even in some cases in your close network, even before you announce you're leaving. But after you have announced you're leaving, make sure you meet with that person you really admired in marketing, or that person you really admired in the accounting department, or the procurement group or something, and connect and say, hey, I'm leaving, but just the reasons why, but I really enjoyed working with you, and I want to keep that connection alive. What I found is that the few times I've left jobs, about 3 weeks later, a bunch of people call me and say, hey, can I send you my resume? I want to get out of here too. So there's that 40% of the people who are looking for jobs, you just became, you're like, there was a prison break, you got out, and now they're all saying, hey, how'd you do that? Set your replacement up to win. Dave did this on a job, and the person who took the job over after him was just astonished. He wrote a little manual on, like, this is the job description, but this is what I really do. And these are the critical relationships you have to make this place work. And here's how the politics works. He wrote a little manual for his replacement, and left it on the desk, for the next person in. And then when you leave, make sure, nobody wants to hear about how cool your new thing is. And nobody wants to hear you dumping on, the thing you're leaving. So, you leave, you exit well, and you say, really, you say things that you can honestly say. I really appreciated working with this team, this group. I learned a lot. This was, an amazing experience for me. It was time for me to move on. I want to keep a connection with everybody who's here. And assuming that most of that is true, then it's a good way. You want to exit on a high note. Yeah. There's absolutely no, as cathartic as it might seem, doing this place sucks, you suck, I'm out of here, you're not the boss of me, take this job and shove it. It sounds good, but in the end of the day, you will look like an unprofessional person. You look like a fool, and it's not. If it's really true that everything in your job was horrible, and we have this right up front of the book. If you work in a toxic environment, if there's rampant sexism, racism, ageism, if you have an abusive boss who is personally abusive and is a nasty, unprofessional person, just get the hell out. I don't have any design solution for that. And there are times when, and we're seeing reports all over the place now of toxic work environments where women were being harassed on the job, for sexually harassed on the job, not like subtly, but like really badly. Both in, what you would think would be blue collar jobs, or maybe you'd think, well, maybe this happens more often on a production line or something like that. But it's also happening, in the halls of Hollywood, in the highest echelons of business, where sexism or racism is rampant. So if you're in a situation like that, you deserve a safe work environment. You deserve a work environment that is a meritocracy that values good work and hard work. So most people have that. If you don't, and you can arrange to leave as soon as you can, because it's not good, it's not healthy for you, it's not good for you, and it's not fair that you should be in that kind of a situation.
We have about 5 minutes left. I was just curious, given that you obviously were writing this book last year and before the events of 2020, which have been so dramatic, to say the least, would you have done, given that, the background of both COVID and I guess Black Lives Matter movement, and I know you've done some videos on redesigning your COVID-19 on your YouTube. Would you have kind of changed anything about this book to reflect that? Do you think there's some things? Well, I imagine it's robust enough that it could still.
Yeah, but
applicable.
We're actually going through a big round of changes at the lab, and it has to do with the issues that have come up, and certainly in the U.S. and I guess globally around the world around Black Lives Matter. The big, I think, an oversight, and I would even argue is a flaw in our book and in the first book, is it's designing your life as if you have all the the power, the privilege, the time, the money to actually engage in some sort of a creative process. But there are people in the world for whom those things have been unfairly withheld or have been, been suppressed or been negated simply because of their race, and also because of gender and other things. But in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, we're really digging into our curriculum to try to understand how to make it as inclusive as possible, how to make it as powerful as possible, so that people of color and other people who don't have, literally don't have the same access that I have to networks and power and privilege, can still use these systems, because we know they can. We know we've got evidence from other universities that are doing research with underprivileged and minority populations that these tools work. And they work as well or better because they provide a structure that isn't there, in the first place. But I think it's really incumbent on us as educators to look at the whole system of education and try to understand how to make it as inclusive as possible, and to recognize that we were speaking inadvertently, of course, from a point of view of privilege, and that not everybody enjoys those privileges, and therefore, how are we making these tools accessible to everyone? How are we making sure that everyone can use them and get a positive effect? So that's a big deal. And I think we really should be writing a book called Designing Your Life Together, because you never design it by yourself. And it's a kind of a flaw in both books that it comes from the point of view of the individual, but there's always, yourself, a partner, maybe a family, maybe another social system, a society that you're designing into. And we need to take into account the issues of, race and privilege. The COVID thing, I think we just double down on all the stuff we've talked about. I mean, the design thinking process starts with empathy, and then you redefine the problem, you ideate, prototype, and test. We always say the life design process is that same process, but it has another step, a step at the beginning called accept. You got to be willing to work on something. You got to accept that I want to change something in my life. And now it's even, you got to double down, because we're in the middle of this COVID crisis. We have left the shore of whatever was behind us. We can't see forward when the new thing is available. So we're in some kind of weird transition zone. And while we're in this transition zone, we can't just keep waiting, because we don't know what we're waiting for. So what do? We have to, have to do a generative acceptance. Okay, this is the transition zone. I'm in it. Some things are no longer available to me, including, social parties with my friends, or maybe jobs that, have gone away. I don't know when we're going to get to the new thing, but the new thing, and I can't tell what the new thing's going to be like. It's not going to be exactly like the old thing. If the new thing waits on, global access to vaccines that are effective against this particular virus, great. But, this is just one of a dozen pandemics that may, happen in our lives. So we really need to figure out how to accept where we're at and find ways to move forward. So it's an even bigger accept, reframe, radical collaboration, because we're not going to get through this alone. So I think all of our ideas and what we've been talking about in our videos all apply, but the first part of, because a lot of people are sort of like, I don't like this. I just don't like this. I don't want to be here. And I get that. I've been sitting in this, my home office now since March 18th. And I haven't been on campus, and I haven't had a chance to hug my students or do anything. I don't like it either. And it's getting harder and harder as whatever the next thing seems to recede farther and farther away. And we don't know when vaccines will be available, and we don't know, if this this particular disease is going to be, this prevalent, this difficult to deal with for another year at least before a vaccine. Is it 2 years before the economy is even close to better? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? I've seen projections that say that 40% of the jobs that went away are never coming back. So when you're in this high uncertainty, it's just going, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be here. It's a natural reaction. But you got to get past that. You got to get to some place where you can start taking action in the face of this uncertainty. And that's going to take a lot of courage. It's going to take a lot of accept. I think there's some ideas and tools in the book that will make that easier for people if they choose to use them.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Bill. I really enjoyed that. I must say I'm cynical about these kind of books off the bat, but I really enjoyed this, and it's really good, and particularly in, as you've just said, I think reframing how you work is so apposite at the moment. So thank you very much for this.
You're welcome. Enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, thanks, Bill, and thanks for all for turning in.